Tonight's big stories. President Bongbong Marcos says the implementation of the rice price cap is, quote, going as well as we can expect. The DSWD begins handing out cash aid to rice retailers.
Dr. Tony Leachon resigns as special advisor to the Health Department. That's after Congresswoman Janet Garin calls his views skewed and malicious. We'll get Dr. Leachon's side later in the show.
And just how accessible is college education in the country? We'll be getting insights from an advocate, Northern Samar Representative Paul Daza, later in the show.
Welcome to the show. I'm Brigitte Malay.
I'm Danny Laurel.
And I'm Sean Yao. I'm going to beat you to it. I think it's not that hard to guess our top story.
Still on the rice price cap. We are day 4? Day 3? Day 3 now. Anyway, this afternoon, President Bongbong Marcos presided over a sectoral meeting on the joint presentation of DSWD, DTI, and DA to talk about Executive Order number 39. Part of that meeting is the rollout of the cash assistance for affected rice retailers who are selling regular milled and well-milled rice at a loss.
The president also maintained that the rice price cap is effective, noting a change in the behavior of rice retailers amid the ongoing distribution of financial assistance. Now, following the implementation of the rice price ceiling, President Bongbong Marcos is expediting the distribution of livelihood assistance to affected rice farmers. Some retailers have been hesitant to sell rice because their costs are higher than the selling price of 41 or 45 pesos. However, after the sectoral meeting at Malacanang earlier, the president mentioned that they are seeing changes due to the assistance distribution.
The implementation and enforcement is going as well as we can expect. Parang nagkaroon naman ng effect na yung iba na ayaw magtinda muna ng kanilang bigas ay dahan-dahan lumalabas na dahil nakakasiguro sila na kahit papano meron silang matatanggap para kapalit doon sa kung malulugi sila dahil sa pagbili nila ng mataas na presyo at saka sa pagpabili nila sa ilalim ng price cap na ginawa natin.
The government started distributing on Saturday 15,000 pesos in cash assistance to small rice retailers affected by the price ceiling on the food staple. But because the president has not yet specified how long the ceiling will be in place for, it remains uncertain how many more times the retailers will get this handout.
Pag sinabi ko na whatever, mag-a-adjust lahat. Kaya hindi magiging effective yung price cap. So, tignan na lang natin kung paano ang takbo.
And according to DSWD Secretary Rex Gatchalian, their target is to complete the distribution of livelihood assistance by September 14. However, they have also requested an exemption from the COMELEC in case they need to extend it. Because remember, giving out financial aid during a campaign period is strictly prohibited by law. What is certain, though, is that the economic team is said to be laying out plans to lower the price of rice.
Alam ko may mga plano sila. The president always has plans. But sa amin, the directive to us is as simple as this. Finish the livelihood grants distribution in the fastest time possible.
Another big question is, how many rice retailers are expected to receive cash assistance from the government? We'll bring in Maricel Halili for the details. Mase, what do you have for us?
Sean, so far, nearly 500 rice retailers have received a livelihood grant with a total value of 7.5 million pesos. DSWD Secretary Rex Gatchalian said that there are 5,942 micro and small rice retailers on the list who have permits and registrations in public and private markets. The Malacanang, though, said that prices of rice are expected to stabilize as its harvest season begins this September. However, farmers are now also expressing their concerns. According to the Federation of Free Farmers, the price of palay immediately dropped by 3 pesos as soon as the price cap was announced. This is because traders are reducing their purchases from farmers to sell at a lower price to retailers. That's why, given the numerous issues hounding the agriculture sector, President Marcos is hoping that these will be resolved, as he even included this in his own birthday wish for tomorrow. Sean?
Right, thank you so much for that update, Maricel Halili. Right, let's go back to President Marcos's pronouncement. Reg, Danny, the implementation and enforcement going as well as we can expect. Is that loaded enough, not loaded enough, vague?
Definitely defending their position there despite
Yes.
all the criticisms against the EO, no? And saying, well, temporary measure, we have enough money for ayuda for the time being.
And that money is essentially to keep the retailers happy for now because they're the ones that are most affected by this, right? I mean, who would sell at a loss? That's just basic
I
free
think the
market
question
economy.
is, how long will the 15,000 pesos
Ayun
last
na nga.
the retailers?
That's what the president didn't
much.
answer when he
Yeah.
was asked that. Because again, there wasn't money set aside for this to begin with, right? I actually don't know where they got the funding for this.
But and also interesting to me was that apparently there's assistance as well for farmers and retailers. So it's a two-pronged kind of a subsidy program just for this price cap.
Yeah.
But I guess the bright point is that harvest season is coming. And I think this month they're saying, well, according to Press Secretary Chaloy Garafil, she said that palay yields could reach up to 2 million metric tons by the end of this month of September and 3 million metric tons next month of October.
And then, of course, we have DTI Secretary Fred Pascual saying that they will review the price cap again in about 2 weeks' time. So they
And
don't-
surprisingly, they're saying, I mean, same DTI, 90 to 95% compliance
yes.
among the retailer. You know, we had some people on the ground interviewing people in the palenques saying that they weren't necessarily complying, but it seems that according to the DTI,
And what I like
First
was,
week, though.
yeah, now, okay,
It's
now.
still early
Let's
on.
talk
It's
again
pretty-
next
all right.
But remember again, different city mayors have different ways of handling the price cap. Some cities, QC notably, Quezon City, Mayor Belmonte saying that they might actually give free rent to a market stall keepers.
to offset their costs, their operational costs.
Meanwhile, in San Juan,
That's an
Mayor
idea.
Zamora is very militant about following the price cap. He says he will punish those who are caught non-compliant.
All right, meanwhile, guys, the Defense Department sees nothing wrong with the U.S. Navy's deployment of an aircraft to monitor the Philippines' recent resupply mission over in Ayungin Shoal. In a Senate hearing today, senators questioned the presence of a U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon aircraft in the recent resupply missions to BRP Sierra Madre. Senator Robin Padilla asked why the U.S. Navy seems to be meddling in our operations. Here's part of that exchange.
Kinaya nga po natin ng 6 na taon na walang kano eh. 6 years, walang kano. Kaya natin. Bakit tayo may kano ngayon? Hindi pa po dapat na kayo ang dapat nagpapatrol doon? Inaamin po ba natin na hindi natin kaya? Kailangan natin ng US Navy?
Hindi po. Ang naging successful po yung RORE natin is dahil sa katapangan at galing ng ating mga Coast Guard at Philippine Navy personnel at saka yung mga civilian personnel.
The DND explains that the U.S. plane did not intervene in the PCG's resupply mission. They say the aircraft was only there to monitor activities in the West Philippine Sea and serve as their eye in the sky. The agency also clarifies that P-8 Poseidon is not a warplane and that it is constantly coordinating with the DND. The Defense Department also noted that the Coast Guard can conduct these resupply missions even without the help of the U.S. Navy. Still, Senator Robin Padilla believes that the mere presence of the U.S. aircraft could escalate tensions in the disputed waters.
Hindi po tayo aamin na hindi natin kaya yung trabaho. Medyo kay may Amerikano o sinong ibang bansa po, kaya po ng Philippine Navy, kaya ng Philippine Coast Guard po yan. Hindi po tayo susuko dyan.
Kahit po sabihin ninyo na yan ay walang armas yan, US Navy po ang nakalagay doon. Sa palagay po ba nyo, hindi yun na magiging dahilan para magpalipad din ang China naman ng kanilang Navy din?
Well, senators even consulted a maritime expert on the matter. Mayan Los Baños covered that hearing and has the details for us. Mayan, take it away.
Yes, Reg, even maritime expert Professor J. Batong Bakal sees nothing wrong with the U.S. aircraft's monitoring of the situation as long as they're only observing for the sake of maritime awareness. Batong Bakal adds that if there's anyone intensifying tensions in the disputed waters, it's China, as they are the first ones to deploy a reconnaissance aircraft and missile boats in the West Philippine Sea. In the end, senators said they only wanted assurance that the Philippine Coast Guard, Navy, and AFP can defend our own territory. To that defense, officials say they are ready to protect the West Philippine Sea and are actually preparing contingency plans should the situation escalate in one of their resupply missions. Senators also believe that the PCG and AFP deserve additional funds to strengthen defense in the West Philippine Sea. Reg?
Thanks for all that detail, Mayan Los Baños.
We're going to pause for a quick break. Right after that, we will be speaking with Dr. Tony Leachon, who recently resigned as special advisor to the DOH after a tussle with Congresswoman Janet Garin. More on that when the big story returns. Keep it here.
You're watching the big story here on One News.
The Health Department's Special Advisor for Non-Communicable Diseases, Dr. Tony Leachon, has quit, citing personal reasons. This comes just a week after a lawmaker questioned his credentials. In his resignation letter addressed to Health Secretary Dr. Ted Herbosa, Leachon said that this is what he believes is best for him and his family, and that he did not make the decision lightly. Leachon also lamented that he was not referred to as a public health expert. The backstory is that during the DOH budget hearing on September 6, Iloilo Representative and former Health Secretary Janet Garin raised doubts over Leachon's qualifications, given his, quote, malicious and skewed statements. There was already history between these two. Leachon and Garin previously butted heads back in 2016 when Dr. Leachon said that both Garin and the late former President Noynoy Aquino should be held accountable for the Dingbaksha mess.
All right, so let's go straight to the source for this story. Joining us tonight, we have former DOH Special Advisor for Non-Communicable Diseases, Dr. Tony Leachon. Sorry, Doc, I had to say it, former. And also, I noticed that you're dressed for battle tonight.
That's okay. No worries.
Doc, so Congresswoman Janet Garin is questioning your credentials, essentially. That's she said a lot of things, but the bottom line is she said you're not qualified for the post, especially since you don't have a master's nor a doctorate degree. Your reaction, please.
Well, I cannot say in behalf of Secretary, former Secretary and Congressman Garin regarding the master course because there have been many secretaries and many public officials that do not carry a master degree. I think it's very difficult to be arrogant about saying that you're qualified, but if I may just say that I was part of the leaders of the think tank law in 2012, that is for the reduction of smoking and alcohol that quadrupled the budget of the Department of Health and reduced the smoking rate to around 30 to 15 million. I was appointed as PhilHealth Director by President Aquino when she was the Secretary of Health during that time. And during the pandemic, I was summoned by President Duterte to become a national advisor for COVID together with Secretary Herbosa. And I did not carry a master's degree, and I would say not even the good congresswoman um, has not been able to practice. I've been practicing for almost 40 years, and I have extensive leadership experience as past president of the Philippine College of Physicians, UST Medical Alumni Association, and Unilever Philippines. So it's very difficult, but if she insists that I'm not a public health expert, then so be it. I'm not worried about my qualifications. History will actually say whether I have contributed much to the healthcare system of the country.
All right, Dr. Leachon, I did go over your Facebook post. There's quite a number of posts there, so I think it's pretty clear where your thoughts are at this moment. I would just like to ask if you've already spoken to Secretary Herbosa already. We know that you've sent your resignation, but have you guys had a chance to chat?
Yes, after the September 6 Congress meeting, I was only alerted by somebody who was at the House of Representatives, and I did not actually tell Secretary Boss about it, and I actually asked for an appointment. So I gave the secretary the latitude as well as the flexibility because I think he was pressured because of the budget hearing, and he has to be confirmed on September 27 at the Senate and Congress. So yesterday, I asked the secretary whether I could meet him at the Department of Health. So we had a nice discussion. We had breakfast, and he invited me to a meeting with the United Kingdom ambassador, and we discussed health, human resources topic and the non-communicable diseases. But but I was thinking whether, in retrospect, we could have been ready with the contract, the human resource director, the expectation, because during the meeting, he succumbed to the pressure of Congresswoman Derin and downgraded my position from special advisor to a volunteer status, even without my approval. Um, the sad thing about it is that I was not even informed, and I was only informed after he actually responded to Congressman Derin. So
Dr.
yesterday,
Leachon, right, nabasa ko rin nga yun no, sa Facebook posts ninyo at saka sa X or Twitter posts ninyo. Ang tanong is, will you continue to help the health department as a volunteer?
um, well, Secretary Herbos actually texted me that he accepted the resignation. Sabi ko, oo naman, tutulong ako. But right now, I would like to distance away from the Department of Health until such time he can actually decide for himself and not be pressured by political pressure. And I think as a Secretary of Health, you should have the moral courage as well as the leadership to decide on things related to health and not only being bamboozled by somebody just because there's a Damocles sword hanging over your head, like a DOH budget hearing and the forthcoming confirmation on September 27. So that's the point. Doon lang ako nang gagaling eh. And wala ako doon, so dapat na-defend man lang ako because I worked with him for almost 10 years. And I was maligned and highly irresponsible comments, and it's quite unacceptable. But I can, and yun, kung inaccept niya yun, ibig sabihin, the August 11 DOA statement na pinili niya ako because of my exemplary medical experience and records, hindi totoo. So kung umayon siya kay Secretary Garin na hindi na ako competent, as a public health expert, ba't ka naman mag-i-stay in a department na walang confidence din sa'yo?
Doc,
ang,
no,
ang Secretary Phil.
Doc, just to clarify, no, you also previously called out Congresswoman Garin on the Dengvaxia issue. To her, in her statement, she said this thing regarding your qualifications is nothing personal. We can hear something about her statement here. We'll just run it for you so we can get your comments on that.
It's actually calling a spade a spade. Kasi kung ano ang iyong expertise, dapat yun ang iyong i-preach. Ang masasabi ko lang, hindi naman po ibig sabihin na if somebody criticizes a program, aawayin natin. Kung tama naman ang criticism, we have to accept that. But there's a border eh. Meron kasing delineation yan dun sa mga mali at yung sa mga kasinungalingan versus facts.
Do you feel there's a personal attack being launched here, or is this just a statement, a questioning of qualifications that could occur?
It's a personal attack kasi I was a resource person at the Congress and Senate in 2016. And then 4 weeks ago, I testified in the Dengvaxia hearing at the Regional Trial Court. And after a week, the Ombudsman, led by Ombudsman Samuel Martires, decided that they are liable for the Dengvaxia. And they're filing cases at the Sidnigan Bayan. So it might be speculative, but if you just connect the dots, out of the blue during the budget hearing, why would a private citizen, a very simple person by the name of Dr. Tony Leachon will be the subject of attack twice in that particular budget hearing? So it's quite an organized media attack on someone, been a witness to this particular Dengvaxia incident. So I think it's not something that I would say out of the blue. It's an organized attack on my personality. So, I can just move on and take another advocacy where I can actually be of value. Ganun lang po yun. Ganun lang po yun. That's
So
all
hindi
it
ka
is.
sarado, Doc, ha? Your doors are not closed to going back to government service as a consultant or in any capacity.
Well, it's all up to Secretary Erbosa. So pag na-confirm siya, perhaps he could have the moral courage na to decide on what particular position. But right now, since hindi siya pa-confirm, perhaps medyo he's walking on eggshells right now. So hindi ko alam. But kung tawagin niya ulit ako, and then malinaw ang job description, then sino naman ako not to actually accept a challenge to serve the country? I did that in the past, and then I can do it again, just for the sake of the country. Believe it or not.
Lastly, Doc, talking about your position as an advisor to the National Task Force for COVID-19 response, I note with interest that in June 2020, you also left that job. At that time, you cited differences with the DOH policies. Baka naman may personalan na dito. I mean, do you have a bad history with anyone around you?
No. If it is not aligned with my values, honor, integrity, moral courage, and respect, umaalis ako. Black is black and white is white. Walang gray zone sa akin. If it will compromise my integrity, my respect for people, I don't need a title actually or a position just to serve. Wala sa akin yun. I can lead even without a title. It's nothing personal. It's just the values that I actually adhere at yun ang paninindigan ko.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. That was Dr. Tony Leachon, former DOH Special Advisor. In other news, Nobel Peace Prize laureate Maria Ressa and her company Rappler Holdings have been acquitted of tax evasion charges, the fifth such case. The ruling bypassing court ended nearly 5 years of legal battle that began during the time of former President Rodrigo Duterte. Recall that the Securities and Exchange Commission issued an order to shut down Rappler due to foreign ownership allegations. Because of this acquittal, the prosecution can no longer appeal the criminal aspect of the case. Back in January, Ressa and Rappler were cleared of 4 tax-related charges by the Court of Tax Appeals. In a statement, Rappler's chief legal counsel, Francis Lim, said the acquittal speaks extremely well of the country's judicial system. He added that it sends a strong message that the rule of law prevails in the Philippines even against the most powerful forces of government. With the dismissal of the tax case, only 2 cases against Rappler remain, which are the appeal on the cyber libel case pending before the Supreme Court and the appeal on Rappler's closure order before the Court of Appeals.
Now, up next, we'll be speaking with Senior Deputy Minority Leader Paul Daza over some of the biggest issues around education and agriculture, that and more when the big story returns. Keep it here on One News.
You're still watching The Big Story here on One News.
Now, the Department of Education is back in the news, and it's not over confidential funds this time. It's because of this new memo seeking to remove the Marcos name in the lesson on dictatorship under the Grade 6 Araling Panlipunan curriculum. DepEd confirmed that this directive is already in effect in schools that are under the pilot implementation of the revised K-10 Matatag curriculum. The agency says there was no pressure to enforce this change and that their goal is to teach dictatorship in a macro perspective.
Pagka tinignan niyo po ang curriculum, kung susuriin po natin, ang pagkakalatag ng mga paksa ay hindi particular sa tao o namumuno, kung hindi sa mga pangyayaring pangkasaysayan. Katulad nga po ng nabanggit ko, hindi po maaring hindi banggitin ang Marcos, ang pangalang Ferdinand Marcos Sr. sa pagtalakay ng paksa ukol sa diktadura.
However, some educators have raised concerns over this change and its impact on teaching history to kids.
Importante to, yung mga tinatawag natin nomenclatures or wordings. Kasi pwedeng maging open siya to interpretation at hindi siya pwede maging as factual since yung implementation ng curriculum influenced yan by ano ba yung objectives na sineset.
The The ACT Teachers Party List also sees it as a form of revisionism, which could affect young students' appreciation and understanding of the martial law period under Ferdinand Marcos Sr.
Nakaka-worry kasi historical revisionism ito, kung tatanggalin yung salitang Marcos. Huwag itago ito sa mga kabataan kasi ito naman talaga yung nangyari.
Well, from learning deficiencies to funding, there's a lot to talk about in the education sector. So we get to talk about all of that with the proponent at the lower house. Joining us tonight, live in the studio, is Senior Deputy Minority Leader, Congressman Paul Daza of Northern Samar. Thank you so much for coming all this way, Cong.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Education plays a major part in your legislative agenda, so let's talk education first, right? And the hot topic at the moment is this free college tuition program. Finance Secretary Diokno has said, or rather seems to be pushing towards a review of that. To be fair to him, he has not outright said that he wants to scrap it, but he has said previously that we can't afford it. Where do you stand on this?
Well, first of all, the statement of Secretary Diokno is dangerous because he's saying it's not sustainable, and it's not true. Okay. But to appreciate the issue, we have to go back to the basic, which is the Philippine Constitution. The Constitution, Section 1 says, all Filipinos are entitled to quality education at all levels and should be accessible. Okay. In 2017-18, we passed a good law, Republic Act 10931, that essentially said if you enroll in a state university, it's free college tuition. The good part of that law, which most people don't realize, there was a second component to the law that I think Secretary Diokno's not familiar with, which is Section 7. It recognized that even if tuition is free, poor students need living allowance. Okay. For room and board, transportation, miscellaneous, because tuition is usually only about 1/3 of the total college cost, right? So the law is beautiful. It's something to be proud of. Out of about 200 countries, I think there's only 20 countries with a free tertiary education. And our law included free living allowance for poor students. So Secretary Diokno's issue, she's saying, yeah, enrollment went up, but a lot of students are dropping out, which is true. Yeah. Because in the last few years, enrollment went up by 15, 20, 25%, but attrition rates or dropout rates went up, especially pandemic time. So attrition or dropout is about 30 to 40%. The law recognized that, but CHED is not fully implementing the living allowance, what we call tertiary educational subsidy. So,
where is that money supposed to come from? Is that supposed to come from the state universities and colleges?
It's supposed to come from the Commission on Higher Education annual budget, and that's why I'm so happy you invited me, because there's also a hidden fund called the Higher Education Development Fund, which is what we call off-budget. It doesn't appear in the annual budget. It's now 10 billion pesos. These are earmarked funds from PRC fees, travel tax, and part of PCSO goes to a Higher Education Development Fund. There's a lot of money. It's 10 billion that can help poor college students, as required by the law, be given tertiary educational subsidy, which is living allowance.
Where is that money going, the Higher Education Development Fund?
That's my whole issue. First of all, it hasn't been well spent. Chairman Popoy de Vera should answer that to the public. Why those funds are not being used to help poor students graduate.
Okay.
That will solve the issue of Secretary Diokno. Because what he was saying is, yeah, we're enrolling, but they're dropping out. It's because we're not complying with the law. If we did that, enrollment will go up and graduation rates will go up.
So you're saying we're only complying with 50% of the law, which is the first
We're
part.
only, correct. We're only complying partly, which is the free college tuition in state universities.
Does the law provide for actual framework or IRR? I'm sure it does. It's a law already on how really this excess fund should be distributed to deserving students? Because I noted also, Cong, that you do have amendments to the Universal Access to Quality Tertiary Education Bill. I would like to know what you're actually trying to fix with that specific law.
Well, first of all, in fairness to the executive branch, Secretary Mina Pangandaman of DBM is compassionate. When she heard about the issue, she put in a 2024 budget about 9 billion for the tertiary educational subsidy. So that's going to be used for poor students both in public universities and poor students in private colleges, because the law recognized that there are also poor students in private colleges. That's why it's such a good law, in fairness to the Duterte administration. That was one good law that I fully support.
Rep, just to, you mentioned that the attrition rate is going up. How sure are you that this is linked to the fact that there's no funding? Maybe there are other reasons here. People might want to work earlier and simply not want a college education. Or, the COVID pandemic may have something to do with it? Or is it just
the
a matter of
government
the funding?
needs to do more survey statistics. But if you talk to the experts, most will say that when college students drop out, it's because usually of financial reasons, economic reasons. Ang mga Filipino students, hindi kulang sa dito, kulang sa bulsa. Yun ang problema natin. And the law just has to be implemented. Okay? So the good thing for 2024, because the last few years, CHED hasn't done a very good job in addressing the living allowance of college students. DBM included in their budget for 2024, and many of the members of the House are pushing that the Higher Education Development Fund, which is an off-budget, it's like a trust fund, to be utilized for the TES. Okay, the law that the bill that I filed in the law, in the tertiary educational subsidy, it said poor students in state universities should be the priority, as specified in the listahanan, or what we call the National Household Targeting System by DSWD. DSWD already did their work, identified the poorest of the poor. Okay, it's already there. And then the next priority are poor students in private colleges with no state universities. Because there are areas with no state universities or local university. So there's a new law that augmented that, called CBMS. I don't want to confuse you, but the LGUs are supposed to do similar to the listahanan, called CBMS, Community-Based Monitoring System.
So they're supposed to identify their poorest of the
Correct.
poor per locality.
Yeah, so I wanted to amend the law to include that. So if you're in listahanan of this WD, or poor, as identified by DILG and the LGUs, that you can be entitled to the tertiary educational subsidy.
Kong, have you thought, since this Higher Education Development Fund is not being utilized properly and it's not even being disbursed, have you thought perhaps that maybe another agency should be disbursing it? Perhaps the DSWD, since they're already doing the identifying and doing the other subsidies?
That's a good comment, a good suggestion. In fact, we were thinking about that. But I have some good news. I just came from the budget hearing today of the Commission on Higher Education. I left the hearing early. It was ongoing when I left. I made a motion which the majority and the minority members of the committee approved just a few hours ago, which is to subject CHED to a special audit of the Commission on Audit.
Okay.
Okay, so we all agreed because they're giving us different information and data. We weren't happy with the answers CHED were giving us. So one possible amendment to the law down the road, if we can prove misuse, is to maybe have DSWD, which is has a good record, because they run 4P, social pension for senior citizen. So that might be a logical next step for at least the Higher Education Development Fund, which is a trust fund held by DBM, to be utilized by DSWD, and they give it to the children of, let's say, 4Ps.
Cong, they are already being audited though, right? By the
Well, yes, regular audit. My motion was for a special audit.
Is
which
that
the
not going
committee
to add
approved.
a lot of bureaucratic paperwork I mean,
No,
already
special
there.
audit is a more detailed audit on the utilization of their funds. And we had many congressional queries. What are really the funds remaining last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? They weren't giving us consistent answers. So many of the members complained earlier today.
So you have to audit the audit.
Well, audit Commission on Higher Education
Special audit.
to do a more detailed audit on the TES, on the free college tuition, and what funds are really out there.
And if the audit illustrates that there is really not enough funds, as Secretary Diokno is saying, are you in favor of a more meritocratic approach, which he is saying the more deserving ones who pass an
Another
exam
exam.
will
Entrance
be the
exam.
ones
No.
because
National
they're more
assessment
likely.
exam.
Yeah, how can we, distribute limited amounts of funding?
Donnie, first of all, it's not true. The budget for free college tuition and TES is 0.008% of the total proposed budget. It's 50 billion over 5.7 trillion. So it's not true. Do you know that in the DPWH budget, there's something like 200 billion pesos just for flood control, one of the favorite, of contractors, flood control project. It's times 4 of tuition, free tuition,
True,
right?
it takes them 200 plus billion for
Correct.
flood control projects.
So that's why I'm so adamant. In fact, I want to talk to Secretary Diokno because he's incorrect. And it's, I think, very irresponsible for the Secretary of Finance to float those suggestions because it's just not true. It's not giving the bigger picture. Okay. Second, I'm not in favor of an exam that's going to make it more difficult for poor, underprivileged students, especially students from the countryside and rural areas. In fact, I'm the reverse. I think there should be an exam which they're now administering in all state universities. Once you meet that minimum standard, I think children of 4Ps, listahanan, should be prioritized. Children of rebel returnees, children that are historically underrepresented. Let's say, if it's the first child from that family to go to college, should be given a priority, right? To break, for me, it's one of the best anti-poverty programs to break what we call the intergenerational poverty.
Cycle of I did see that on your website, one college student per family, and you're pushing for that.
Yes, because if we did that, we would be helping so many families because in the Philippines and in other parts of the world, there's statistics, the higher your educational attainment, the higher your income bracket will be.
All right, Cong, Maria's there showing me a sign that we just have a few minutes left. I wanted to get your thoughts on the price cap. As well as our whole rice situation and lack of a DA secretary.
Well, okay, we should have a full-time secretary, I think. Second, I was an economics major. We don't want to mess around with the laws of demand and supply for the long term in a normal situation. But the situation is not normal, so I favor the price cap on a temporary basis to go against the hoarders, people who are basically monopolizing the supply of rice. So on a temporary basis, I think price cap can work, but on a long term, it's not going to work.
But is this a solution that could be implemented from time to time, you think? If this happens again, which could possibly happen again, that we'll always keep putting price caps.
As a legislator, I will give it to the executive branch, to the president, to make those temporary executive decisions. I think on a short term, whether they do it now or next year or whenever, to go against the hoarders, because there's price manipulation. And then to raid those warehouses, I'm in favor of that. But I don't think it's sustainable in the long term.
Does Congress have anything for these hoarders and price manipulators and those middlemen that are not doing right?
We've had so many investigations at the committee level. What I want to see, no less than the Speaker of the House should say that these people should be identified and prosecuted.
And then lastly, Cong, just a getting a signal now, but I wanted to talk to you about Maharlika too, because last year you made headlines for first being one of the staunchest critics, and then you flipped, and suddenly you were supporting the investment fund, the sovereign fund. Are you fully convinced now? Are you 100% on board?
It's because, as part of the minority, I objected to the bill many, many times. In fairness to the majority, 80% of my objections, they carried as amendments to the law.
Okay.
So the Maharlika law became a much better bill. For example, I was objecting for the president to be chairman of the board of directors. He's got so many problems already. They took that out. They added independent directors. So it was a much better bill. I didn't want to be an obstructionist. And because many of the amendments were from me, I ended up supporting the bill.
So then, are you completely happy with the final version? There were still some provisions that they were arguing about.
When the bill came out of Congress, which I supported, the amount was 75 billion. By the time it came out of the Senate and the BICAM, it was 125 billion. So I had mixed reaction. But overall, I think I did a good job, at least improving the bill, because I couldn't stop it. I would be outvoted anyways, because it was a bill by the majority. So overall, I did my job, and I think
So you can
I'm
go to
okay.
sleep at night.
Yes,
Regardless
I
of your
did my
beliefs.
work for the country and for my district.
All right, as part of the minority, one quick question, Cong. Housing. We all know Secretary DSUD, Secretary Acuzar, has said he will deliver 1 million housing units per year. Do you think we can attain that?
It's a great goal. That's one of my expertise. I hope he does it, but it doesn't look he will meet the targets of 1 million a year. It's just, but it's a good goal. You know, I always say when I speak in graduation, aim high to the students, diba? Aim high. Because if you miss it and you're close to it, it's a pretty good accomplishment instead of no goal. Or if you aim low and then you miss it, it's super low. So it's okay to target 1 million. He won't make it. If we get close to it, then he did a good job.
Okay,
Well,
we're
he
going to
did-
aim high as
At
well.
least he's saying that.
That is all the time we have for tonight. I'm so sorry to cut you short, but maybe we'll have you back another time. Thank you so much for joining us, Deputy Minority Leader in Northern Samar, Representative Paul Daza.
All right, we really don't have any much time left. But before we go, time for our big picture tonight. Does anybody here need to renew their driver's licenses, Cong? Maybe you?
Thankfully,
well,
not
for
yet.
those who do, here's what you can and should expect. You will be receiving a paper license card instead of the plastic card, which we normally get. And this is because of the shortage of plastic cards since the start of 2023. Motorists now have to be careful in protecting their paper licenses, especially amid the rains. The public is also being advised to save a screenshot of their licenses from your online LTO accounts when you renew your license. The LTO has since announced that they will provide a 1-year validity extension for plastic cards that have expired since April of this year.
Sounds like deja vu.
Cong. This has
That
happened
is
before.
true. That is true.
What
I
happened?
extended to 1 year. I interpreted in the budget hearing. Talagang tinira ko yung LTO. Sabi niya, they want to balance convenience of the public and revenue generation. I go, how can you say that? You can say that in public. You better rethink it. And then he changed his mind. Said, okay, we'll extend it for 1 year. Because they can't supply the cards.
So now it's
Why?
until
He
April
wanted
7th.
2 months.
Not having plastic an issue still.
Yeah.
What happened was there was a bidding. The losing bidder filed a case and did a TRO against LTO.
Oh, so they can't do anything for that
Correct. So
time
I said
period.
then, it's the convince the public, extended at least 1 year. He wanted 2 months, so he gave it. That
Si
was
Cong lang
actually-
pala yung,
Ayan.
si Cong lang pala yung may
Ayan.
backstory.
Okay, that really is all the time we have. Sorry.
That's it for the show tonight.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a good night.